From the moment someone studies a modern map of Canada, the mind catches on a peculiar detail that feels almost out of place. Three enormous northern regions, massive, empty, stretching from the height of the Rockies to the frozen edges of the Arctic Ocean, stand apart from the rest of the country. They are not provinces like Ontario or British Columbia. They are territories. And it is here that a question begins to rise, a question asked quietly but persistently by viewers around the world. Why does Canada, a prosperous, stable, and highly developed nation, still have territories at all? Why have these vast northern lands larger than most countries on Earth never become full provinces? Why do they exist under a different political category entirely? To answer that question, we must travel backward through time, far beyond the neat borders we see today, into an era when Canada was not a giant northern world power but a slender ribbon of land hugging the shores of the Atlantic. When the Dominion of Canada was born in 1867, it was almost unrecognizable compared to the country we know now. There were only 4 provinces: Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Small in size, clustered together, and concentrated along the St. Lawrence River Valley and the eastern coastline, these first provinces represented only a tiny fraction of what would eventually become Canada. Everything beyond them, everything west and north, was a mystery to the new nation. A place of forests, rivers, tundra, and ancient mountains. A place inhabited by indigenous nations whose histories stretched back thousands of years. A place so massive and so empty that it seemed less like land to govern and more like an unknown frontier, untouched and unclaimed. But this land did belong to someone, not a nation but a company. For over 200 years, the Hudson Bay Company held dominion over a giant swath of North America called Rupert S. Land. Granted a fur trade monopoly by the British Crown, the company operated like an empire of its own, establishing forts, trading posts, supply routes, and alliances with indigenous peoples. Its influence was immense, its reach was enormous. And when Canada negotiated the purchase of this land, it acquired an expanse so vast that it nearly tripled the size of the young country in a single moment. But such a massive landmass posed a problem. It could not immediately be divided into provinces. The population was far too small and to spread out. The government lacked the resources to control such a large region directly. And so, in 1870, Canada created a new administrative area, the Northwest Territories. Not a province, a territory, a region governed not through constitutional autonomy but through powers delegated from Ottawa. It was a temporary solution, an experiment, a way to manage lands that lacked the population, infrastructure, and governance systems needed to stand as provinces. Yet the story of Canada was only just beginning. As settlers moved westward, drawn by the promise of farmland, trade routes, and economic opportunity, the northern interior began to change. Manitoba joined Confederation in 1870, though at first it was tiny, more like a small square carved from the center of the continent. British Columbia joined in 1871, lured in part by the promise of a transcontinental railway. Prince Edward Island followed in 1873. Ontario and Quebec slowly expanded their borders northward. Waves of migration, railway construction, and new industries carved the wilderness into recognizable boundaries. But the massive Northwest Territories still remained, huge, untamed, thinly populated. A place where governance was more a concept than a reality. Then came a turning point that shook the entire region, the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896. In the deep Northwest, in a place so remote that many maps barely acknowledged it, gold was discovered. Within months, tens of thousands of prospectors poured into the region. They came from the United States, Europe, and across Canada, braving brutal winters, dangerous river crossings, and unforgiving terrain. Towns sprang up overnight, chaos followed. And the Canadian government suddenly faced a crisis. This wild, booming region could no longer be managed as an afterthought. It needed law, order, and structure. And so, in 1898, the Yukon Territory was created, separated from the Northwest Territories, to deal with the explosive population growth, the influx of fortune seekers, and the urgent need for organized administration. This was a moment that defined the Northern governance model. Territories were born not out of political ambition, but out of necessity. They were created to manage extraordinary challenges in extraordinary environments. Throughout the 20th century, the North continued to evolve. The Northwest Territories remained immense but sparsely populated. The Yukon developed its own identity, a frontier shaped by mining, mountains, and the resilience of those who chose to live there. And far to the east, on the frozen lands of the Arctic archipelago, another movement began to rise, one that would reshape the map forever. For decades, Inuit communities across the eastern Arctic had petitioned the Canadian government for recognition of their distinct land rights, history, and identity. They sought a territory of their own, one that reflected their culture and their connection to the land. After years of negotiations, advocacy, and legal agreements, a historic decision was reached. On April 1, 1999, the map of Canada changed for the last time. Nunavut was created, carved from the eastern half of the Northwest Territories. This was not just a redrawing of borders. It was an acknowledgement of Indigenous sovereignty, culture, and ancestral claims. It was a major step in the effort to give Inuit communities control over their homeland. And with that, Canada reached its modern form, 10 provinces and 3 territories. But why did these northern regions remain territories rather than becoming provinces? The answer is complex, woven from history, geography, population, and constitutional law. In Canada, provinces draw their powers directly from the Constitution Act of 1867. Their rights and responsibilities cannot be removed or overruled by Parliament. Territories, however, operate differently. Their powers are delegated through federal acts, not constitutional guarantees. This means that while territorial governments do have authority, autonomy, and elected legislatures, ultimate control remains with the federal government. In other words, a territory's political power exists because Ottawa grants it, not because the Constitution protects it. The most important reason for this system lies in population. The 3 territories combined have fewer people than many medium-sized cities in the South. Climate and geography add another layer to the challenge. The North is one of the harshest regions on Earth. Winter consumes most of the year. Temperatures plunge to extremes, sea ice shifts with the seasons. Even basic construction becomes a complex, expensive task. In such conditions, territories allow local governance to function while relying on federal support for systems too large or too costly for small populations to manage. But there is more to this story than logistics and law. The territories are home to vibrant Indigenous cultures, Inuit, First Nations, and Métis, whose histories and identities define the North. Their governance structures reflect a blending of local traditions, modern political systems, and land claims agreements unique to the region. Many of these arrangements would not fit neatly into provincial frameworks. Instead, they rely on agreements between Indigenous governments, territorial governments, and the federal state. The territories, then, are not simply lesser provinces. They are regions shaped by their own histories, geographies, and peoples. They reflect the reality that Canada is not and never has been uniform. The North has always operated differently from the South, held together by arrangements designed to meet its unique needs. And perhaps that is what makes the territories special. They are reminders of Canada's complexity. They are symbols of the country's northern spirit, vast, remote, breathtaking, and deeply rooted in Indigenous history. They tell a story of land acquired from an empire, shaped by gold, divided by time, and ultimately defined by the people who live across its frozen landscapes. In the end, the territories are not unfinished provinces. They are complete in their own identity, born from history, strengthened by culture, and sustained by a model of governance that fits the reality of life in the Arctic. Their existence on the map is a testament to Canada's long journey of expansion, negotiation, and recognition. They represent the northern heart of the nation, a place where ancient land meets modern governance, where the past and future of Canada continue to unfold beneath the glowing northern lights.